veure, doncs, comencem amb la següent ponència. De fet, ja l'última de totes, després vindrà la taula rodona. La següent ponència és la Marta Franceschini i us aviso que ella la farà en anglès. De fet, ella és italiana, ella treballa a Londres, ens la farà en anglès. Si alguna persona té problemes amb l'anglès o diu, mira, escolta'm, no vull fer l'esforç, que sapigueu que podeu anar aquí i hi ha traducció simultània, d'acord? Per tant, sense cap problema, aneu cap allà i ho busqueu. Per si voleu estar més tranquil·les i no haver de traduir, endavant. Us presento la Marta. La Marta és historiadora del disseny, investigadora i comissària. Ella és cap de comunicació editorial de l'European Fashion Heritage Association i també assessora arxius de marques i museus i escriu i imparteix regularment conferències sobre història de la moda i cultura material. Per què la tenim aquí, la Marta? Doncs perquè no sé si esteu una mica atentes a les exposicions que es fan arreu a nivell de moda, però ella va cocomissariar l'exposició Fashioning Masculinities, Art of Menswear, que va tenir lloc el 2022 al Museu Victoria and Albert de Londres. Va ser una exposició molt interessant perquè després d'estar acostumades a que totes les exposicions siguin de dissenyadors, i dissenyadores anava a dir, no gaires, doncs quan hi ha exposicions que de cop deixen de centrar-se en una persona i obren l'angular i reflexionen sobre l'essència de la moda, doncs sempre és interessant. I aquesta concretament que va fer la Marta, jo crec que és una exposició de referència i precisament com el nom diu, Fashioning Masculinities, el que feia era fer una reflexió sobre el binarisme tradicional en moda, com s'ha anat articulant al llarg de la història de la moda i també com ha operat la dissidència. Per tant, us recomano moltíssim que si no veu veure aquesta exposició, que és possible que la majoria no ho hagi vist, que rescateu el catàleg, perquè el catàleg és una autèntica meravella per entendre aquesta deriva de la masculinitat a través de la moda. I sense més, un agraïment a la Marta per venir des de Londres i res, endavant. Thank you.
Buenas tardes a todo el mundo. Me hace mucha ilusión estar aquí, soy honorada de esta presentación también. Y soy feliz porque he investigado sobre género, identidad, moda para muchos años como académica, como curador. Entonces es un honor estar aquí y hablar con vosotros de unos o dos proyectos de exposición que me ha permitido de investigar en una modalidad diferente. No voy a hacer mi presentación en español o en catalán o castellano, voy a hablar en inglés, pero comprendo español, lo hablo un poquito y entonces seré encantada de responder a quien pregunta al final de la presentación. So now I am switching to English. And as Sylvia was saying, today I'd like to focus on Fashioning Masculinities, the Art of Menswear, which is this exhibition that I assisted. I was assistant curator to the... Thank you. I was assistant curator to the exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London from 2019 to 2023. So I followed the production of the exhibition, the research, the installation, and then I was basically the one giving tours and delivering the exhibition to the audience. And what I would like to do today is show you the exhibition because I don't think everyone has seen it. I imagine that most of you haven't been to London to see it, also because it was right after COVID, so it wasn't even easy to travel. But I would also like to go behind the scenes and think about the curatorial process that we followed, and also kind of the theoretical questions that we tried to answer to with objects and with, strategies of display narratives. And in many cases, we tried as much as it was, possible in an institutional, national museum to give political answers. So not shy away from making statements or taking some stances in issues that for us, for the curatorial team, but also for the whole museum at large, were kind of pressing in 2021 and then 2022 when we actually opened the exhibition. And then I'd like to, the title is Beyond, it includes the word beyond Fashioning Masculinities, because that exhibition was the starting point for us of other investigations. And I will be happy to share another curatorial project that I'm working on now that comes directly from that exhibition. It's in another museum. It has a slightly different focus, but it's a sort of testament to a very wide exhibition that then could be and can be translated into many other kind of display investigation. I have been researching masculinities from before joining the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2019. I have an MA and a PhD in which, and I use these 2 moments to investigate the construction of masculinities and the menswear system in Italy in the early 20th century, so during the 1910s and 20s, and then the rise of fascism, and then the demise of fascism, and the rise of the Republic, and what that meant, what these political moments meant in terms of the construction of a system that now is quite popular and an economic force for Italy and also internationally. So I joined the V&A, and one of the things that I kind of looked at quite closely was the relationship between national identity and vestimentary practices. And this is it was quite interesting to see that in the media in the 1920s and 30s, a lot was being done to link what men wore to their own nationality. And that continued also after the Second World War, and that kind of translated into what we call now style. So Italian style or Spanish style or German style. These words that don't really have a meaning most of the times. I try to go back in history and look at objects, which is what I do as design historian, and try to find answers to these kind of definitions in the objects. Then, so I was brought into the team, the curatorial team, in 2019 as an expert on contemporary menswear, because the curatorial team was composed by Claire Wilcox, who was senior curator at the V&A, and Rosalind McKeever, who's the curator of paintings at the Victoria and Albert. So the exhibition, and this is kind of clear also from the title, try to look at masculinities as something that is performed and can also be worn. And, you know, we had garments, but we also wanted to have a good number of artworks that could show the public not just what a garment was, but also how it was worn and what was the attitude that men, through different eras, had towards wearing garments that were deemed as masculine. It was the first exhibition this was the entrance of the show, and it was the first exhibition that the V&A, which is a museum that's been open for a while, dedicated to menswear, because for many reasons, the museum never decided to do something that had this focus, probably in I mean, the reasons were varied, but mostly related to the fact that menswear was considered boring and not worthy of being exhibited in a museum that is a very good research institution, but is also has a business model, so needs to have visitors. So we decided to focus on menswear, and we use the word menswear as a category that we decided worked to indicate garments, accessories, but also the poses and the attitude that have codified the performance of masculinity over the centuries and in different geographies for how much as we could. Over the centuries, because The exhibition chronology spanned from the Renaissance to 2021, so it was quite ambitious. And what we wanted to do was to show how designers, but also artists and wearers was very important, have used fashion to kind of diversify and complexify the definition of masculinity and declare different meanings every time. And I just want to underline the idea that we included wearers, and we declare that because we had agency in mind. So we were thinking about what's the agency is not just what the designer decides to put on the market. The agency is also, and this is very true, especially it's true now, but it was very true in the 18th century and in the 19th century. It was people were deciding what to wear and how to wear it. And even the title, there was a brief moment in which the title was not Fashioning Masculinities, but was Attire and Attitude. Because for us, the attitude of wearing is as important as the cut of a jacket or, you know, the construction of a pair of trousers. So our main idea was to present to the public the masculinity as a very complex kind of concept whose history has been oversimplified. And to kind of acknowledge this complexity, we decided not to construct a chronological journey, but we instead thought that it would be easier for the public to follow and also more connected to what we perceive as masculinities today, to organize the show in 3 thematic sections, which place the masculine body at the center of the reflection and also of the practices of fashion, so producing, designing, wearing, performing, etc. So the 3 main galleries were called Undressed, Overdressed, and Redressed. This is one of the images of the first gallery, so Undressed. We decided to start with the bare body as much as, you know, it was possible, because it was the body itself that had to be considered fashionable, molded by changing ideals, by garments, but also through exercise. So the gallery traced the origin of European fashion and beauty standard for men, and that's why we had casts of classical sculptures. And in particular, we wanted to underline the importance of the grand tour. So this tour that young men in the 18th century would do around Italy to learn about beauty, to learn about what it meant to become a man. It was a sort of journey that took them from boys to men while enriching their understanding of proportion, of beauty, of course in a very controlled way. So the plastic cast of the classical sculptures were placed on plinths, and you can see it there. But then, of course, it was a fashion exhibition, and we wanted to have fashion from the start. And the display strategy here was to have fashion and sculptures on plinths, just trying not to construct a hierarchy, what's more important and what's less important. For us, these objects were telling a story. It wasn't about deciding what art form is more important or more valuable than other. For us, it was about showing how, through time, we can trace connections in people, makers and wearers, interested in reflecting on the body as the beginning of fashion. And here you have a few other images, and we'll get into some more details on the objects in a second. We move to the second gallery, and as you will see, the 3 galleries are very different also in terms of space design and exhibition design. We sometimes joked and thought and said we did 3 exhibitions instead of 1, 3.5. You can imagine the things that we excluded, that were not in the show, that we evaluated. It was like 10 exhibitions. Anyway, this is the second gallery, this is actually a peek. This was the beginning of the second gallery, and that was called Overdressed. And it moved away. It looked at the overdressed. So the body was not the center of fashion. The center of fashion was the body overdressed by colors, by precious materials, by dimensions, by taking space. And indeed, it looked at the magnificent wardrobe of elite masculine adornment from the Renaissance to Carnaby Street and to, you know, the very latest catwalk shows between the 2019 and 2021. The first painting that was welcoming the visitors in this section was this. Some of you probably recognize this. This is Giovanni Battista Moroni, Il Tagliapanni, which in English has been translated as the tailor, but it's actually the cutter. It should be the cutter, which were two very different two different people. One would cut the fabric and one would sew the pieces together. And there was a hierarchy in the guilds as well. So this is a very important loan from the National Gallery. And we wanted to start with this because one of the keywords that we had in mind for this gallery was power. Of course, we talk about elite wardrobes, but at the same time, we wanted to say that power could be, that clothes could kind of help individuals to assert power, even if they were not part of this elite society. The tailor is clearly someone who works, and he decides to get his portrait. I mean, the story is that he decides to get his portrait taken with the trade in his hands, so holding the shears and working. But at the same time, he's wearing this pink doublet, which is, you know, one of the creations that he would make for one of his wealthy clients. The gallery was quite complex, and in terms of designs, the colors of the walls and of the plinths kind of created the journey that we wanted the visitors to take. One of the most popular, I would say, subsections of this gallery was this. And this was called In the Pink. In this section, we wanted to kind of challenge the genderization of colors, and especially of pink. Pink was first associated with femininity in the 20th century, but was indeed considered kind of masculine in the 18th century because it was very expensive to produce. It was very precious. It came from a little animal, a cochineal, that would have to be crushed to create the color. And, you know, the quality of this color is kind of testified by how vivid the hues are of the historical garments that we exhibited. What we wanted to do here, uniting historical garments, contemporary fashion, and also paintings, all in the same space, was to, for one, you know, retell the real story of this genderization of color. And on the other side, we wanted to show how contemporary designers, especially designers who identify as queer, use pink to make a statement, use pink to, you know, tell something about themselves and their identity. The gallery continued with trying to kind of deconstruct other stereotypes. So colors, but also flowers and decorations. Always trying to kind of showcase examples of different eras together to show a sort of internal continuity of masculinities. What changes is the idea of hegemony and kind of the prevalent masculinity or definition of virility in a date, time, and space. And, you know, at one point in time, light blue, leopard printed coat from the 1780s would have been epitome of masculinity, which is something that probably to our contemporary eyes is slightly difficult to grasp. The third gallery, Redressed, followed the more specific chronology, and it followed the birth, the emergence, the popularization, democratization, and dissolution of the suit. So after the French Revolution, kind of the spirit of democracy and rationality, and also the emergence of the UK as a powerful force in the European ground, reshaped menswear. So the lavish textiles and the ornaments remained in the realm of women's wear, while a more egalitarian and practical, as it has been described, form of menswear, inspired by military designs, but also by country tailoring, became popular. So what we looked at in this gallery was the beginning, and this is, country tailoring, English country tailoring, and a sort of Anglomania, uniforms, to kind of get to the establishment of the suit as the uniform of modernity. And of course, in this section, we also thought about the emergence of the word dandyism, and who were the dandies at the beginning of the 19th centuries, and what the definition of dandyism says about the great masculine renunciation, which is a construct that was established in 1930 by a psychologist, but then looking at the objects, so studying the objects, and also the consumer patterns of men in the 19th century, scholars, and we followed the scholars, realized that it wasn't a renunciation at all. It was just a reconsideration of what was important to define this virility and this masculinity. Before we had colors and prints and decorations, and now we have the perfect cut, the perfect construction of the sleeve, the fit of the trousers. I think that we wanted to do was to have undressed and redressed as mirrors, as galleries, because the neoclassical period, the period of redress, at the beginning of redress, was inspired by, those calculations, those classical proportions and ideals that were established before in the classical time and then reprised in the Renaissance. So the idea was to have overdress in the middle, but then construct these two mirrors to show that there's a circularity. Although we seem to see different things, things have the same kind of soul in some ways. The section was varied, not in color but in shapes. This, for instance, is, especially the first part, is a selection of frock coats from the beginning to the end of the 19th century. And here we went a bit linguistic, and we thought about the very name of these garments, frock coat. Frock means dress. And these garments were said to be skirted. So they had a skirt, because there was a cut in the middle that then allowed more volume on the bottom. So that was another kind of subtle way of including the idea of, are skirts gendered? Are frock coats gendered? And why do we even ask this question? And then, of course, another tension that we wanted to portray was that between blending in and standing out. So on one side, we had amazing examples of tailor-made suit, bespoke suit, so couture for men, basically. A suit that is made on the proportion and on one specific body in one moment in time. And then on the other side, we had, we tried to tell the story of the beginning of ready-to-wear. So the suit becomes a uniform for everyone. And here, do you see those very, very narrow trousers? Those are the ones that Karl Lagerfeld wanted to wear. Bob made this point earlier. Karl Lagerfeld lost 50 kilos to get into Slimán's very narrow trousers that didn't even fit the mannequin. Had a very hard time. And then we ended with a sort of dissolution of the suit. So what is a suit today? Is it something that is the same material top and bottom? Is it something that has a lapel or maybe not? We wanted to see how fashion responded to the dissolution and kind of tried to keep some sort of rules while still, going against the rules. These were the three galleries. Of course, we wanted to have a finale that was uplifting but also very open. So the finale was called Dressed. The V&A is a very popular institution for blockbuster exhibitions, so we wanted to end with something that spoke to this very wide public. And we decided to have three viral garments. One, we've seen it earlier, is the Gucci dress and jacket that Harry Styles wore as first men on the cover of Vogue US. And apparently, the original idea was to have just the dress, but then Anna Wintour arrived and said, no, he needs the jacket to make that point. Then it's Billy Porter, Kristen Siriano, a dress that Porter wore for the Golden Globes, the first tuxedo dress. And then on the back is the wedding dress that one of the participants to RuPaul Drag Race UK wore for the final episode, so the wedding dress, recalling the idea that every couture show has to have a wedding dress. So now that we've seen the show, now you all saw the show, we go into the curatorial process. I told you that the V&A never had an exhibition like this before. It took Claire Wilcox, the senior curator of the V&A, 8 years to get the concept of the exhibition approved. Because she tried and tried and tried, and nobody believed that such an exhibition could have any public. So she went around and prepared a very long presentation photographing all the men around the museum to show that men were in the museum and men's fashion was already in the museum. The point was to hone in and make a statement about it. Also in connection to what was happening in the system, because 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, the menswear industry was booming. And also the fluid fashion movement was very strong, and it was coming from menswear designer, mostly. So as I said before, it was very hard, telling it after, it sounds logical to go about the show in this way, but it was very hard to kind of construct the narrative, trying not to lose the class perspective, although it was difficult. The exhibition was basically Eurocentric, as much as we tried to include other voices. We decided to focus on 3 themes connected to the body, because the body is the performative element, is what allows us to perform, and is what we can mystify through fashion, but we can also enhance through fashion. And also, it was something that was used to create ideals. And I was thinking about this earlier when we were looking at hermaphrodites and statues of hermaphrodites. These statues were changed throughout their lifetime. The member was sometimes cut off. So, art has been used and is still used to create ideals. So what we wanted to do was see how these ideals change through time. And this kind of palette helped to construct these very different spaces in the museum that allowed also the audience to be engaged continuously. This is just a behind the scene on how you do an exhibition. You see loads of things, you organize them in themes, and then these themes don't get to the finish line. Most of these objects, this is one of the first pin-ups, they're called, mood boards, that we made, were not in the exhibition in the end. But this is how we did research. We tried to consider as much as possible, and then we had to come to terms with the logistics, what we can find, what we can get, what we can say with what we have, and how we can put things together. And in a way, putting things together was very important for us. This is what we wanted to do was to show the ideal, but also to deconstruct it. And we we wanted to say that masculinity is a monolithical concept only if we just look at the surface, because masculinities allows us to see that the bodies are different, the performances can be different, and the messages we send can be different. Because is a statue, a classical statue, still an ideal if it lost its arm? And how can that translate into contemporary practices? And this is a beautiful video by this Canadian filmmaker, Anthony Patrick Manieri. It was called Arrested Movement. He called men of all shapes and sizes, and he asked them to perform in front of his camera. And we showed the video close by to statues and also to a dance performance of Spitfire, choreographed by Matthew Bourne. I don't know how I'm doing with time. Fine? Okay. Of course, we also addressed we cannot talk about identity and fashion without talking about sexual identity. So we addressed same-sex desire, and desire was a very important keyword for us, because it's a word that is used in fashion to understand what stays and what goes away, but it's also something that is very much connected to how the body poses. And here we were looking at poses that could kind of indicate some kind of stereotype vulnerability inherent to the binary, but then applied to bodies that were powerful on the surface. And since we were looking at masculinity as a societal marker that could be defined by garment, we also decided that we wanted a Spanx, which is called Manx, because it's Spanx for men. So those pecs that you see are fake. They are constructed through compression. And next to it, we had a pair of packing pants and a chest binder. Because what else says that masculinity is a performance that can be constructed through clothing, as much as clothing that help people get in the shape that they want to see themselves and be seen. And in front of this, we had a work by Della Grace Volcano, who I think was quoted this morning as well, that kind of showed how these things could be worn, and it showed the process of wearing these pieces. We really thought about the trans body. And separating the first gallery and the second, we had to think about ways of, welcoming people in the next section. And separating the first gallery to the second was what the fantastic designers we worked with, Jade and Ali of JA Projects, called the pinnacle. And it was indeed a very dramatic moment. And here we had a video installation by artist Casillas, in which Casillas uses, it's called Tiresias, reminding of the Greek myth, in which the artist kind of uses the warmth of the body, their own trans body, to melt these idealized eyes torso. And this was basically what you could find. So you would walk from the first gallery and then see this very flimsy, very, very light installation. And the sound was, the sound of the drops and all the mix of the different soundtracks that we had in the different galleries. Clearly, since we were talking about masculinity as performed through clothing and through attitude, we decided to have non-binary people, but also women hiding kind of in plain sight throughout the exhibition. And this was a triptych that we constructed. The first one there is a painting of the Baron Dudley, the third Baron North, 1615. Close to it, we had a video, an extract from Orlando, in which, directed by Sally Porter, in which Tilda Swinton plays Orlando, this kind of time-traveling and gender-changing character. And next to it, we had a coat, a design by Gianni Versace from 1992, same year of the movie Orlando, that was inspired by 17th century menswear, but applied to, this was the fetish collection of Versace. So we were moving in between time spaces, but also we were looking at lived experiences and, you know, the fashion world and the fashion system. And this is how it was displayed, and the video was right here. And we also had other examples, and that's why I'm saying that women were, we didn't have a section, we had women around because that, we thought, reinforced the idea that masculinity is something that you can wear through these markers. This is Frances Stewart, one of the beauties of the court of Charles II in England, who decided to get her portrait wearing a men's jacket and a men's wig. And then next to it, an awful photo that I took of the cabinet, in which we have tailored garment, the bespoke tailoring, and it's Max Beerbohm, a driver, the one sitting is a driver, I don't know why I don't remember the name, but next to it is Marlene Dietrich. And it was kind of hidden away. We wanted people to stop and think, why does that have more waist than the other? Why does it have the bosom? But maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. We wanted to play with the audience. We wanted the audience to engage with the exhibition as well. It wasn't a passive experience, I would say. And then, of course, as much as we could, we tried to tackle the idea of race, and we used uniforms for this. This is a piece that was not in the exhibition, but we really wanted. This is a portrait of Jean-Baptiste Belly, who was one of the generals of the revolution in Haiti. And he decided to get his portrait taken wearing the uniform of the power he was kind of going against. We couldn't have this painting because it was too fragile. It's in Versailles. So we did research, and we found that Omar Victor Diop, this fantastic photographer, had taken inspiration from that painting to re-own the narrative, to reappropriate of that narrative. Clearly, mutatis mutandis, changing the symbols that we had here. You know, a football and some sort of like headpiece. I kind of showed you a few objects, and I showed you the space, you know, the journey. I wanted to show you a map just to kind of reiterate the idea that we had two mirror sections and then one kind of separated sections, and we really wanted to this section to have an internal narrative, and probably in this, the strongest in terms of designs was the first. Here, our main conceptual problem was whitewashing. It was very white. So with discussing with Jaden, with the designer, he came up with this idea of making walls of fabric. And in this fabric, and you see there's a stretched black body that kind of is made of the fabric and contains this constructed fake whiteness. As you can imagine, we had around 90 mannequins, and every single piece had a different, we had to think about the different bodies for each mannequin. Because of course you can imagine how, you know, we think that masculinity doesn't change. Imagine how much the masculine body, or the male body even, if we talk about biology, changed from, you know, let's say the 1740s, the earliest we had a mannequin was 1740s to 2021. And we also thought about what we were saying earlier. So what happens if the mannequin, which is usually whole, doesn't have a head, or doesn't have an arm, or doesn't have a leg? How do we show that the mannequin itself can become, kind of an ideal, we make it run. And indeed, how we make the contemporary speak to the past and to ideals of the past through mannequins. And in this case, we had 3 examples of contemporary fashion: Virgil Abloh, Jonathan Anderson, and Ludovic de Saint-Sonin, all working with this idea of transparency. And we decided that we wanted them to pose as the 3 Graces of Canova, which was upstairs. So visitors would go into the museum and then maybe click that that was something that spoke also to the history of the V&A, because it was really a love letter to the museum. In terms of objects, we wanted looks to be complete. So we completed the looks, because what we were interested in was the whole form and the whole look. So in many cases, we worked with the conservation department to construct these gauzy replicas or to complete looks, and that came, from the research that we've done. And we did it in many cases. We also did it with hair to kind of inspire how the mannequins would be styled. Styling a mannequin was a very important thing, because style, as much as it's something that is ungraspable, is something that can be shown through the construction of an image. And in some cases, we didn't go past to present, but we went, present to past. This is a Prada campaign from 2012, and this inspired the way in which we displayed the frock coats of the 19th century. So we tried not to be hierarchical, even in terms of chronologies. And then at the end, the 3 mannequins at the end were the only ones that were invisible. So you couldn't see the body. You could just see the shape of the garments. And here you can see Claire holding that famous image, because she wanted it to look really the same, although we had to make some adjustments because it looked very bad without the body inside and the wind. I'll just use 3 minutes. Do I have 3 minutes? To show you the beyond. And this is a very much work in progress. I'm not even confident this is going to be the final title. But this is an exhibition I'm working on with the Palais Galliera in Paris, with Marine Kiziel, who's the curator of 19th century there, and is connected to the inclusion of elements of menswear in women's wear in the long 19th century. So end of the 18th century, 19th century, and the beginning of the 20th century. So what was before Chanel? What happened before those performers that Gladys Bentley, all those famous names, they were on the shoulders of whom? So we are in the process of research, and I really urge you, if you're interested, if you want to be involved, if you have something to share, please get in touch after, in whatever language you want. We can manage. Because we're really researching and really refining the topic, but we're looking at examples of this. So riding habits, and how the riding habit is the first moment in which, the first item in which elements of menswear get into the female wardrobe. So we're talking about 16th century here, on to the 18th and 19th century. And it's the moment in which we see trousers for women, first underneath the skirt and then out. Changes in materials, wool, rough wool that starts to be used in women's wear, tailors that start to be catering to women and not just dressmakers. I'm sorry, the images are very bad. Changes in men's garments to turn them into something that can be worn by a female body. And then, of course, more familiar elements like smoking and tuxedos. When did women start wearing them? And how did we arrive to, what we know today, to Radcliffe Hall. We all think about Radcliffe Hall as always wearing menswear. Radcliffe Hall usually had the jacket, but then the skirt underneath. Because in some places, in America especially, there were laws that prohibited women from wearing more than 3 pieces of what was deemed as menswear. And there was a bylaw in France that stayed on till 2011 that prohibited women from wearing trousers. Nobody cared, but still it was there, written, till 2011. So this is very much what we're looking at, the spaces, the trends, the actions. If you have monocles, if you have collection, if you have monocles, let me know. We're looking for monocles. And of course, we want to be able to talk about same-sex desire for women and how that affected fashion, how that affected acceptance as well, because fashion is very powerful in making something that was not accepted, because someone considers it frivolous, someone overlooks it, and therefore there are some spaces for dissidence there that then can become something that is mainstream. And that's when, the fashion industry comes in and popularizes the tuxedo, which is, a very complex theme, because is it popularization, sexualization? Still, it's something that becomes part of the mainstream, so is normalized in a way, if we can use this word. So that said, it's a very work in progress. It's going to be September 26 in Paris. You're all invited, but please, if you want to reach out before, we really believe that curating is a shared practice. It's not something that one person does alone. I really hope that that's a direction in the future. So we want it to be a collaborative practice as much as possible. Thank you so much. And sorry for not speaking in Spanish.